All right, so now we're going to look at the regulation of respiration, right? So actual ventilation process of it, right? So how was ventilation regulated? Well, if we look before from what we learned before is when the diaphragm contracts, you inspire. Whenever it relaxes, you expire, right? And that specific nerve that causes this contraction and relaxation via action potential is called the phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve receives impulses from the central nervous system, right? Specifically the brain. Regions of the brain are in charge of the actual of this respiration process take place, right? And so when we look at the actual brain, three regions are really involved. So you have the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the higher brain. The higher brain can be composed of the cerebrum, hypothalamus, limbic system, etc. Right. And so when we look at ventilation, the regulation of ventilation, there is a central pattern generator located in the pons and the medulla oblongata, where we have this pacemaker potential that generates this breathing, right? And so this is happening in the central pattern generator, right? And so when we look at how everything is regulated, so first region we're going to look at is in pink, which would be the medulla oblongata, right? So starting from the bottom here, I'm going to write the ventral respiratory group and the dorsal respiratory group. Okay, so ventral meaning in the front, right, towards the front region, dorsal in the back. The ventral respiratory group's main function is regulation of all the accessory muscles of forced inspiration and expiration, right? So ventral respiration, again, is responsible for a lot of these accessory muscles, respiratory muscles here, where any kinds of instances of forced, for example, expiration, like abdominals contracting, you have your intercostal muscles contracting, right? The different muscles in the sternocleidomastoids and the scalene muscles, for example, for inspiration. Any kind of accessory respiratory muscle groups are regulated via the ventral respiratory group. The dorsal respiratory group, however, is regulating specifically relaxed or quiet breathing, right? So majority of the control of the diaphragm is controlled from the dorsal respiratory group. So you have the diaphragm contractions here, right? So diaphragm receives impulses from the phrenic nerve, and the phrenic nerve causes the diaphragm to contract or relax, right? So the DRG, dorsal respiratory group, is involved with the contraction of diaphragm, right? So whenever DRG is stimulated, the diaphragm contracts, you have inspiration. So if I write this here, you inspire for here, all right? And so everything in the pink here is specifically in the medulla oblongata, all right? Now if we look at the white that I have here, if you see it as the white or whatever, here, you have this next region, which is the pons. So in the white, I'm going to write the pons. So there's two specific regions in the pons. There's the apnoidic center and there's the pneumotaxic center, right? And these, again, are stimulating the dorsal respiratory groups and ventral respiratory groups in order to generate a rhythm for respiration, right? So you have, first, you have the apnoidic center here. Let me see. Let's not mess with the spelling. That's what I thought. Apnoidic center. Apnoidic, so again, everything here in the pons is in white. Apnoidic center stimulates the dorsal respiratory group, right? So if we look at the apnoidic center, this is responsible for inspiration when it's stimulated, right? Then we have another region here, which serves as an inhibitor of the apnoidic center. It's called a pneumotaxic center. So the pneumotaxic center here is an inhibitor for this apnoidic center right here, right? So when we look at this actual diagram here, if I stimulate the apnoidic center here, you have inspiration. If I stimulate the pneumotaxic center, you have expiration. So you expire. Expiration takes place, right? And so when we look at these centers, again, in the white, it is the pons, specifically. All right, and then if I grab this next region, so for example, let's play around with this. If I add some kind of drug X, that comes in and inhibits the pneumotaxic center, would this lead to? If I inhibit, so I have an inhibitor of the inhibitor. If this inhibition takes place, right, in the pneumotaxic center, this drug X would actually lead to either inspiration or expiration. What do you think? It would lead to inspiration. It would inspire. Vice versa, if I have another drug here, let's do it in yellow, that inhibits the apnoitic center, so drug Y, what do you think happens? Well, you're inhibiting the inspiratory group, right? And just like the pneumotaxic center, drug Y is playing almost identical functions as the pneumotaxic center. This would lead to an expiration, so you would expire. Okay, so you would lead to expiration. All right, and then finally, when we look at the pons, the pneumotactic center, and the apnoitic center, the final region that I want to look at, which is going to be in green, is the higher center. All right, so now we're going to look at the higher center. And so the reason why I'm putting the higher center here in this location, this can either or regulate via either inspire or expire, right? So we look at the higher center, right? So this is composed of, for example, the hypothalamus, right? So hypothalamus plays a big role in a lot of other physiological functions. You have the limbic center. So limbic center is your emotional center, right? Or your limbic system, right? So what's part of the limbic system? For example, you have the hippocampus for memory, and then you have the amygdala. And what was the function of amygdala? Amygdala's main function, again, there's much more regions, so I'm gonna put a little dot of this higher center. Amygdala is emotion, right? And they're very proximal to the hippocampus, right? That's why what memories when you're a kid you always remember? You always remember the scary ones, right? There's the ones that actually hyperstimulated the amygdala, and again, processes it into the hippocampus, right? And so limbic system plays a big role, either inhibition, right, or activation or stimulation of respiration to take place, right? For example, if someone goes, ah! If you jumped, right, you can notice that your body begins more scared, and so now you begin to have more ventilation taking place. Your stimulation of ventilation begins. I just scared you. I apologize if I did scare you, so I didn't mean to, right? And so this can either play an inhibitory role or a stimulatory role, depending on the stimulus that is being presented, right? So for example, when we look at higher brain center, also is composed of your cerebrum as well. And cerebrum is basically you have conscious control of breathing, right? That's why I can hold my breath, right? So that would cause an inhibition of breathing, of the respiration to take place, right? And so this is the general idea of how ventilation is being regulated throughout the respiratory system.